On a chilly night in 1944, a truck quietly exited the gates of Ravensbrück, a notorious Nazi concentration camp for women. Without hesitation or remorse, its cargo was discarded just outside the camp, not supplies or waste, but the lifeless bodies of women who had perished from the brutality of slave labor, destined to be burned. Yet Ravensbrück was merely one of many secret prisons, overshadowed by more infamous places such as Auschwitz, now a haunting memorial and museum that recounts the unimaginable horrors endured during Nazi rule. It seemed Hitler was determined to inflict such atrocities from the very beginning. Establishing prisons and camps was among his earliest actions upon becoming Chancellor of Germany in 1933. At first glance, it appeared sheer madness, but within his insanity lay a calculated purpose, a darkness profound enough to terrify even the most ruthless killers, as we'll soon explore.
Hitler's network of prisons and camps was designed to eliminate anyone who opposed or displeased the Nazis. Political rivals were among the first detainees, followed by those labeled antisocial, rebels, communists, people the Nazis aimed to forcibly Germanize, groups considered racially inferior, and common criminals. These victims were not merely a few thousand individuals. Although secrecy shrouded the exact figures, approximately 1.65 million prisoners were officially recorded, with about 1 million confirmed deaths. However, the actual numbers of prisoners and fatalities likely far exceeded official counts. Hidden from global scrutiny, these secret camps were centers of unspeakable cruelty, their atrocities carefully concealed. Numbers were falsified, deaths hidden, and evidence destroyed. Yet, as time passes, these hidden horrors are gradually emerging from the shadows. The truth you are about to uncover is dark and harrowing. Do you have the courage to continue? In March 1945, Allied forces stormed the SS Sonderlager Hinzert and dismantled it, leaving behind almost no physical traces. But the memories of its survivors remain vivid, etched permanently by the unspeakable horrors they endured. Perched atop the Hochwald Plateau, at an elevation of 550 meters, Hinzert was exposed to harsh weather conditions, constant dampness, bitter winds, thick fog, relentless rainfall, and freezing winter temperatures. Staying there meant enduring relentless suffering, something the Nazis seemingly recognized when they converted this 1938 housing facility into a labor camp in 1939. Being sent to Hinzert was essentially a death sentence. Prisoners who weren't claimed by the brutal climate fell victim to guards who embraced cruelty not just as duty, but as twisted entertainment. Guards forced inmates to stand in the freezing cold as punishment for even minor infractions. Something as trivial as sneezing could earn such a fate. Yet, this was among their mildest punishments. With disturbing enthusiasm, guards whipped prisoners mercilessly, using aluminum wires, smiles on their faces, as if engaged in casual amusement. Any perceived weakness, sickness, or exhaustion marked prisoners for immediate death. Survivor Peter Hassel watched helplessly as guards beat a man to death simply for stumbling. He witnessed a frail friend dragged away, too ill to continue working. Peter never saw him again, and, tragically, death might have been the easier path. The guards' brutality knew no limits, their methods of torture inventive and barbaric. They unleashed dogs on prisoners, drowned others, and reserved their harshest treatments for a specific group known as the Night and Fog prisoners. These were political detainees kidnapped from occupied territories and deliberately isolated, hidden from other prisoners as though erased from existence. Following their superiors' sinister commands, guards ensured these prisoners permanently vanished. Yet, the Night and Fog detainees weren't the only victims of Hinzert's extreme brutality. In 1941, 2 trucks arrived carrying 70 Soviet POWs. These men, falsely promised medical examinations, were instead cruelly injected with lethal potassium cyanide. The Nazis coldly observed their agonizing deaths, hastily burying their bodies in a nearby forest to conceal the atrocity. While the horrors at Hinzert were beyond comprehension, they were part of a larger tapestry of cruelty, raising the question, could other prisons, such as the infamous Gestapo house prison in Berlin, possibly match or even exceed the brutality of Hinzert? Continue exploring this grim history to find out.
and police battalions murder more than 1 million people.
Hidden in plain sight beneath the bustling streets of Berlin, the Gestapo's notorious house prison operated secretly in the cellar, unbeknownst to most citizens. Reserved for the Gestapo's most significant or dangerous prisoners, the prison was compact, housing between 34 to 50 small cells, sufficient space considering the brief and brutal tenure most inmates experienced. Very few prisoners ever emerged from these cells alive, and although the true death toll remains unknown due to the Gestapo's careful destruction of evidence, chilling accounts have survived. Constructed with thick concrete walls specifically to silence prisoners' screams, the facility was designed meticulously to shatter even the strongest wills. At its core was a sinister torture chamber, equipped with horrifying instruments, chains and hooks to suspend prisoners, electric shock devices, whips, and an array of tools specifically created to inflict severe pain and suffering.
For the Germans, the impact was exactly the one that you can feel while listening to this story. They couldn't believe it.
The Gestapo interrogators performed their grim duties with ruthless efficiency. Prisoners endured relentless beatings targeting vital organs, vicious whippings using rubber hoses and iron-tipped lashes, and even drowning attempts. Yet, despite this barbaric physical abuse, the Gestapo's psychological torment proved even more devastating. With chilling precision, they played mind games designed to break inmates completely. Prisoners were forced to witness the torture devices, amplifying their dread. For weeks, prisoners faced severe sleep deprivation, driving them to hallucinations and paranoia. In this fragile state, inmates endured mock executions, spared from death only at the very last moment to maximize psychological anguish. When these brutal methods failed, the Gestapo intensified their tactics by involving the prisoners' families. They cruelly brought parents, spouses, and children before the prisoners, threatening harm unless they confessed. Faced with unimaginable anguish, most prisoners broke down under the weight of protecting their loved ones. Those who resisted often chose to take their own lives rather than betray any secrets. Desperation drove many to suicide attempts, cutting wrists with shards of smuggled glass or swallowing dangerous objects. Tragically, these suicides were not always swift or merciful, and medical aid was intentionally withheld. The Gestapo derived twisted satisfaction from witnessing prolonged suffering, sometimes deliberately extending prisoners' agony as punishment for their defiance. Yet, as horrendous as the conditions were within the Gestapo's house prison in Berlin, even darker terrors awaited inmates in places like Fort Breendonk in Belgium, a place of such extreme brutality that it was aptly dubbed the Hell of Breendonk. Within the walls of Fort Breendonk, a fortress originally built during World War I,
was where the Gestapo conducted some of its most brutal interrogations. The rooms here were specially soundproofed to muffle the screams of the tortured.
The Gestapo and guards unleashed relentless cruelty. Its thick concrete walls, encircling moat, and remote location made it a favored choice for the Nazis' darkest activities. Beginning in 1940, Belgian resistance fighters, Jews, and countless others suffered in this horrific place. Unlike notorious camps such as Auschwitz, where prisoners often resigned themselves to their inevitable fate, inmates at Fort Breendonk faced a terrifying unpredictability. Life or death hinged on the whims of the Gestapo, the guards, and especially the sadistic prison commandant, Philipp Schmidt, and his equally ruthless wife. On days when Schmidt was bored, he amused himself by releasing his ferocious German shepherd upon helpless prisoners. His wife took twisted pleasure in handing out arbitrary punishments, while the guards starved inmates, considering hunger a relatively mild form of torture.
So you feel sorry for the perpetrators who have to do such hard work firing their guns and always having to shoot women and children.
In the brutal winter months, they cruelly pinned prisoners' heads beneath icy waters of the moat using shovels, holding them there until they drowned. The prisoners lived in constant dread, yet the uncertainty they faced was preferable to the horrific alternative. Survivors recounted being abruptly awakened in the middle of the night and dragged to a torture chamber, a room of sheer horror. Equipped with instruments designed specifically to crush fingers, skulls, or testicles. Others capable of burning deep into flesh. and even tools used to brutally slice prisoners open like animals. The room was a terrifying embodiment of suffering. Survivors vividly remember blood and human waste draining away, painting a gruesome picture of the room's brutal purpose. Equally horrifying were the executions. Prisoners were led to one of 10 concealed execution posts, hidden from external view, where they were systematically shot, forced to watch their fellow inmates being torn apart by bullets. Every prisoner lived in perpetual fear, always wondering if they would be next. It's no surprise that this prison earned the grim nickname, the Hell of Breendonk. Yet, disturbingly, even this unimaginable cruelty would be surpassed by atrocities at other Nazi prisons, pushing the boundaries of horror to an entirely new dimension. In 2019, Boris Pawiak, a survivor of several Nazi camps, including the infamous Natzweiler Struthof, recounted the horrifying reality prisoners faced within its confines. He described the relentless, soul-crushing labor in the camp's granite quarry, where only the strongest survived to face the same grueling tasks day after day. Prisoners' sanity gradually eroded, watching helplessly as their fellow inmates succumbed to exhaustion or illness, their deaths an everyday occurrence. Survival in Natzweiler Struthof was a constant gamble, a grim lottery of life and death. Boris clung fiercely to life and survived, but countless others were not so fortunate, and not all perished due to hard labor or illness. Some had committed no offense at all. Their sole perceived crime in the eyes of the Nazis was being Jewish. Even the battle-hardened Allied forces were deeply shaken by the shocking atrocities they uncovered. Driven by twisted racial theories of superiority, Nazi anatomist August Hirt and his colleagues pursued grotesque scientific experiments intended to prove Aryan dominance. On July 30, 1943, approximately 86 Jewish prisoners were transported to Natzweiler Struthof. Fully aware of the grim fate awaiting them, these prisoners were nevertheless unprepared for the horrific events that followed. Initially, the Nazis cruelly fattened these prisoners, only to herd them later into a sealed room. There they released deadly potassium cyanide gas, mercilessly killing every person inside. However, this was merely the first stage of their sinister plan. Immediately following their deaths, the still warm bodies were handed over to Hirt, who dissected and preserved them in formalin.
Was meticulously planned to maximize the psychological impact on prisoners.
His ultimate grotesque aim was to assemble a collection of preserved skeletons, showcasing the supposed anatomical superiority of the Nazi master race. Fortunately, his chilling project ultimately failed. When the Nazis were not preoccupied with their horrific preservation experiments, they forced countless others into conditions that reduced human beings to skeletal remains. A haunting visual testament to the depths of Nazi cruelty. Imagine being trapped in an endless maze of dark tunnels deep underground, never knowing if it was day or night. This was the reality for the prisoners of Dora Mittelbau, who spent months at a time breathing stale, dust-filled air with only cold stone floors to rest upon whenever the guards permitted them to sleep. Meals were little more than a small piece of bread and thin stew, barely enough to keep them alive, yet still expected to continue their relentless labor. Death was ever present, a constant companion in these bleak tunnels. Many prisoners succumbed to exhaustion, their bodies giving out after endless toil. Fatal accidents were common occurrences, and the near-total lack of hygiene meant that illnesses spread rapidly, claiming countless lives. Yet, the cruelty extended far beyond neglect. Guards, empowered by the critical nature of the prisoners' work in Germany's war efforts, required no real justification to execute their captives. Any accusation, true or false, such as sabotage, was sufficient for immediate execution. Over 200 prisoners were hanged in this manner, although survivor Michel Despierre noted that something as trivial as stealing a bread crust could also result in execution. The bodies were often intentionally left hanging as stark, terrifying reminders to the living of their fragile existence. The Dora Mittelbau camp was home to approximately 60,000 prisoners, a nightmarish environment, described by survivor André Sellier as a tomb of damp stone. Out of these prisoners, roughly 20,000 perished under horrific conditions. Their forced labor was not mere mining. They were building Hitler's infamous V-2 ballistic missiles, leading the guards to intensify their brutality due to the strategic importance of the prisoners' tasks. In Dora Mittelbau, hope was systematically extinguished by the guards, who seized every opportunity to crush spirits. As Allied forces closed in, the Nazis initiated a forced march, evacuating prisoners from the camp. Those too weak to march were abandoned, left behind as skeletal survivors, haunted witnesses of the unspeakable horrors endured within the dark tunnels of Dora Mittelbau. On September 17, 1942, 18-year-old Leszek Zabłocki, known as Jola,
zaczęło się wcale nie od pomyłek językowych. To jest właśnie jeden ze sposobów wybierania.
was arrested for his involvement in the Polish resistance. He was swiftly imprisoned in the notorious Pawiak Prison, a Gestapo-controlled facility in Poland.
1939. Germany invades Poland.
Als alter Soldat des Weltkrieges befindet sich der Führer an der Front.
Designed to house 1,000 inmates, but grotesquely overcrowded with 3,000 prisoners, forcing cells intended for 3 occupants to hold up to 18. This deliberate overcrowding was calculated cruelty, a tactic to amplify suffering and despair. From his second day onwards, Zabłocki and fellow inmates endured daily roll calls starting sharply at 5:30 a.m., immediately followed by brutal interrogations. Prisoners faced merciless beatings, fists, truncheons, iron-tipped whips tearing flesh apart. Torturers took pleasure in their captives' agony, casually smoking cigarettes and using the open wounds they inflicted to extinguish their cigarettes. Their cruelty knew no bounds, and their creativity in torture methods was chilling. Occasionally, the Gestapo sought an audience for their acts of cruelty, forcibly bringing in prisoners' families to witness these horrific scenes. They performed unimaginable tortures, ripping fingernails from prisoners' fingers, crushing bones, and subjecting victims to waterboarding, reveling in the prisoners' desperate struggle to breathe. Death during torture was common, yet Zabłocki managed to survive these ordeals. But survival offered no security. Those who endured initial tortures often faced mass executions, shot outright, or subjected to the Gestapo's sadistic games. Prisoners were forced into relentless physical exercises until they collapsed and died. Others were hanged in their cells, their lifeless bodies left suspended as grim reminders, untouched until the Gestapo ordered their removal. The prisoners, overwhelmed by despair and agony, staged a courageous breakout attempt in July 1944. Tragically, their bravery was not rewarded with freedom, but met with ruthless vengeance. On July 20, 1944, over 380 prisoners were executed by the Gestapo as retaliation. Zabłocki, remarkably, survived this massacre. However, the survivors had lost all hope, their spirits shattered. As the Soviet army advanced, the Nazis panicked.
Millions of Soviet citizens are living under the yoke of German occupation.
Frantically trying to erase their atrocities, Zabłocki watched as his tormentors destroyed Pawiak Prison, demolishing the very site of so much suffering as they hastily evacuated him and the remaining prisoners. Though the physical structure of Pawiak was obliterated, the haunting pain remained embedded in Zabłocki's memories, a relentless echo of unimaginable horror.